Hi, I'm Jamie, your Prairie partner from Pinehurst Park Nature Center. Today we're going to talk about the Prairie and the people that live here. For over 5,000 years, the Prairie has existed and people have lived off the land. These people are Native Americans. The Native Americans that were mostly here in Nebraska include the Oto, the Omaha, the Pawnee, the Ponca, the Arapaho, and Cheyenne, just to name a few. Native Americans had lived on the land for thousands of years, and they really knew the resources that existed out on the prairie. The prairie plants that are out here provided them food. They also provided them medicine and other resources. Could you imagine this being your shopping mall, grocery store, and pharmacy? So Native Americans knew what plants could be helpful and also what plants could be harmful to them. Food included the different fruits that grow out here and also seeds. And medicines could be found in the roots, the stems, the seeds. They were hunters and gatherers, which meant that they gathered food from the plants and also hunted the animals. Can you think of what animals they might have hunted out on the plains? Deer, elk, and especially bison were important parts of Native American lives out on the plains. The bison provide not only food to eat, but other resources came from the bison. Their hides could be used for shelter and clothing. Their bones could be used to make tools and utensils and even toys. The bison are an important part of Native Americans and the Great Plains. The Native Americans that lived on the plains lived in different structures. Some lived in teepees. Most of those tribes were nomadic and moved around, so the teepees were easy to pack up and move with them. Other Native Americans that lived out here, like the Pawnee, were more settled in one place, and they lived in small villages and earth lodges. Did you know that Native Americans use fire out here on the prairie? Not only for cooking, but they would burn big open areas to help draw in bison, and that would help them be able to hunt them easier. They also might have burned areas to help them move through the prairie so they didn't have to go through all of that tall grass. Because Native Americans burned the prairie for many different reasons, it helped reduce the amount of trees that grew and also naturally helped the diversity of the prairie. So today we do the same thing with prescribed burns. We burn areas of our prairie out here to mimic what the Native Americans did and to continue to have a beautiful prairie landscape. Back in the 1800s, European settlers started to come across the land. Some just traveled through what is now Nebraska, and others stayed because of the Homestead Act. These settlers came onto pieces of the land and decided to make their home here. But they didn't have the resources to build a house. We don't have a lot of trees on the prairie. So they discovered that they could use the earth, the sod. They would dig up sod bricks and construct small homes. When you build a sod house, your walls are made out of dirt, your floor is made out of dirt, and sometimes even your roof was made out of dirt. It wasn't the most glamorous home, but it was the first home for many of these settlers. However, some of the homesteaders that came here were able to transport wood and lumber to make a cabin or a small home that you see behind me. This is the Hudson cabin. A family of 5 lived here, a mom, a dad, and 3 children. They ate in there, they slept in there, they cooked their food in there, and that's their space to hang out. Do you think that would be kind of cramped quarters if you were to live here with 4 other people? And when this was built here in Lancaster County, or what is now Lancaster County, this was the grandest house of the whole area. It's a different lifestyle than we have today. And it was challenging. The European settlers that came here, like we said, had never been in an area like this before. There was cold winters, hot and dry summers, wind, and your neighbors were miles and miles away, so it could get pretty lonely out here. The Hudson family that lived in this cabin had cattle. Other families that settled plowed the prairie and started growing crops. That really started to change the landscape. As you know, now in Nebraska, we have a lot of farmland and pastures. Here at the Nature Center, the prairie that we see here were once fields. We've converted those fields back to the native landscape so visitors can come and experience what Nebraska would have looked like hundreds of years ago. And it provides a wonderful habitat for birds, plants, and other insects.
So we have some pretty old stuff that you can see here at Spring Creek Prairie, like those glacier rocks left behind during the Ice Age. But we also have something left behind more recently. This was left behind by European settlers traveling across the country with their wagons, horses, and families, going out to Oregon and California. Can you see it? Look up the hill and look down the hill. I'll give you a clue. I'm standing in the middle of it. Okay, it just looks like a big ditch. This is a wagon rut. I'm standing in a piece of the Oregon Trail. So many people traveled this very route that the wagons and the animals churned up the prairie grasses and the prairie soil so much that it left this big, deep dip in the ground that you can still see today. This piece of the Oregon Trail was called the Nebraska City-Fort Kearny Cutoff, and it was a shortcut of sorts from the Missouri River near Nebraska City out west to Fort Kearny in the middle of the state. People would travel along the ridge tops mostly, and when they needed water, they would come down the hill, down to places like Spring Creek, fill up, and then go on up the hilltop back to the next ridge, doing it over and over again, all the way to California. If you were a 10-year-old 150 years ago, traveling this very trail with your family in a wagon, all your worldly possessions, headed to California or Oregon, do you think you would be riding in that wagon or walking most of the way?